Hi, I'm Doug Frank with American Legion Post 162 in Hillsdale, New Jersey. Today is July 17th, 2018, and we're here to speak with Hillsdale Police Captain Sean Smith about his experiences in the United States Marine Corps. Sean, with all stories, why don't we start at the beginning? Why don't you tell us about where you grew up and your family and your background?
Sure. I grew up in Tenafly, New Jersey. Very nice town, very affluent town. My dad happened to be a captain of police in Tenafly. And I was raised with 3 siblings, and I graduated Tenafly High School in 1991 and decided I was going to enlist in the Marine Corps.
What was behind your decision to select the Marine Corps?
Well, I mean, from everything I've heard, the Marine Corps was kind of... The Marine Corps is a special branch of service, and every Marine feels that sense of pride, and will probably tell you the same thing, that there is a separation between the Marine Corps and the other services. But I guess I just felt that it would give me the ultimate challenge, and that's what I was looking for and yearning for at the age of 18.
Were other members of your family in the Marine Corps or in the military?
No, I was the first Marine. My father was a member of the Army National Guard, and my brother served in the United States Army through the ROTC program, and left the service as a captain.
Oh, that's great, yeah. How did your parents feel about you enlisting?
Well, you can imagine my mother, like any mother, was very hesitant, tried to talk me out of it, but nonetheless, she was supportive, and my father was highly supportive. And but I had made this decision at the age of 18, and I was going to carry through regardless of what their wishes was.
And as you had mentioned, you went to a delayed enlistment. That means that you reported for active duty some months after you had actually signed all your paperwork?
Correct. So I saw a recruiter in Bergenfield, New Jersey, and it was probably around May, June, and realized that there was a delayed entry program. So I had signed a contract which would have delayed me leaving to boot camp on December 23rd of 1991. So you got to remember that the Gulf War was just coming to an end. Mm-hmm. So I left for boot camp on December 23rd, 1991.
Now, how did you get there, by bus or train? Or?
I remember staying over the MEP station in Newark. It was probably a very seedy hotel, and I was very nervous and apprehensive. The next morning after breakfast, I believe a bus showed up, took us to Newark Airport, and the rest is history. I think we flew into Beaufort, South Carolina, and from there, I honestly thought that I'd have a few minutes before we were greeted by drill instructors in the airport. So to my surprise, there was no rest, and that's really when the experience began, is when you get off that airplane. So you were greeted by drill instructors, and they were barking all sorts of orders, and if you had any contraband on you, cigarettes, whatever the case may be, everything went into a receptacle, and you were their property.
Did you know what to expect?
The internet wasn't around back then, so I kind of did a little research through books and movies, and I watched Full Metal Jacket, which is a very authentic representation of what exactly happens in Marine Corps boot camp. So yeah, I had a little idea what to expect, mm-hmm. But nonetheless, it's like getting thrown into a fire.
Yeah. Now, how long was boot camp?
Boot camp was approximately 3 months.
3 months.
So I graduated in March.
Okay. And did you get leave while you were at boot camp, or you were there the whole time?
So you don't get any leave when you're in boot camp. The only leave you get is the day before they call Family Day, the day before graduation. Mm-hmm. And that gives you an opportunity to tour the island and actually see what Parris Island is all about. But at that time, you're so anxious to get off the island. You really are just so happy to see your parents and your family, and that sense of pride that comes over you is just something that's indescribable. But they grant you 10 days of leave at the completion of boot camp.
Okay. What are some of the memories you have? You mentioned fleas and the facilities there at Parris Island. Do you have any stories to tell about what the living conditions were like in boot camp?
Yeah, so every Marine can tell you about their sand flea experience. So I happened to, go to boot camp in the winter months, and although the sand fleas are still prevalent, they're not as bad as they are in the summer months. So I can only describe to you my experience, but it's been rumored that they're placed there for discipline purposes, and you almost buy into that theory because they harp on drill and discipline, and the minute you go like this or the minute you go like that, you stand out from the crowd, obviously, and you get disciplined. But it's all part of the experience. So the only way that I can describe Parris Island to you, and I've never returned back since, I can only give you this perspective as a recruit, was that it's equivalent to it's just so different from going from civilian life, going to a remote island where there's brick barracks and just real, I don't want to call it poor living conditions, they're not poor living conditions, but just so different, so militaristic. The pipes, the Paris Island is famous for the above ground heating pipes. So it's very, everything is a culture shock when you get there. Nothing is like it was back home, obviously. So it's very, very, I guess I call it desolate conditions. And that's your perspective at the time. They're really not. The island itself is very clean. But it's the distant noises you hear, the barking of the drill instructors in the background. And you got to remember that you're not the only recruit platoon going through this at the time. There are several platoons going through it that are, some much more advanced than you are at the time. And you look to your left and you look to your right and you see these young Marine recruits marching in step, and you just say to yourself, "Wow, one day I'll be like that." So the whole experience is just very, very humbling.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel that you were physically prepared for the rigors of boot camp?
I did, but I was also given some good advice, and that was don't get yourself in too good of a shape. They're going to do it for you. Mm-hmm. So as long as you could pass your initial PFT tests, and as long as you're in semi-decent shape, you fall within their standards, you'll do well. They'll do the work for you. They'll make sure you leave that island in tip-top shape, and they have 3 months to get you there.
Do you feel that boot camp is where the Marine pride gets put into your person? Is that where you pick up the pride that Marines carry? Is it basically boot camp?
I think that's where it's instilled. Because you got to remember, you're going there as a civilian, and the first thing they do is they sit you down and they take your hair off. They cut you. They give you the 30-second haircut, and they just break you down to basically nothing, a foundation, and then they build you back up. And it's kind of almost impossible to go through Marine Corps boot camp and not be somewhat brainwashed. But it's a good brainwashing. It's out with the old and in with the new, and you just become part of something that's very special.
So once you leave boot camp, you moved on where?
Well, once I left boot camp, I went to an MOS school, and my MOS was chosen for me. I was a machine gunner. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have to go too far. I stayed in North Carolina and received about a month's worth of training on how to become a machine gunner, and more specifically an M60 gunner. There were 3 weapons of choices that we used at the time. One was the M60 Echo 3, and the other was a 50 caliber machine gun, and the Mark 19, which shot 40 millimeter grenades.
And did you learn on all 3, or basically?
All three, but by the time I got to the Fleet Marine Force, I was an M60 Echo 3 machine gunner.
And what's the caliber of the round on that?
7.62.
Okay, so it's and is that a one-man operation, or do you need somebody to feed the ammo to you?
Yeah, it's actually a 3-man operation. So when you went on let's say a forced march, for instance, there would be an ammo man, who was usually the junior most member of the 3-man team. He was saddled with carrying all the ammunition, carrying the tripod, in addition to his M16. He probably had the most weight on him. I mean, 1 bandolier of ammunition is 7 pounds, and I think he had about 3 or 4 bandoliers, just ammunition alone. And then you had your A gunner, and your A gunner might have carried the tripod, but he was basically the most experienced. He would get you on target, and he had his M16. And as the machine gunner, you carry the M60 Echo 3, which was 18.5 pounds. These are the things you don't forget, nor does your back years later. Yeah. And so he was the one to really get you on target. And so it's a 3-man operation, a machine gun team.
Mm-hmm. And what was your rank when you got out of boot camp?
I actually graduated boot camp a private first class. Most recruits graduate a private. And if you excel a little bit in boot camp, you got an extra stripe. And I had excelled a little bit, and I was very proud that I graduated a private first class.
That's great. So you finished, then you advanced your advanced training, which is a machine gunner, and then where were you stationed?
So I got stationed in North Carolina at Camp Lejeune, and I got assigned to 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marine Division. And 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marine Division, let's see, that was made up of, heavy guns. It was your average infantry unit. Mm-hmm. And most infantry units deploy within a 3-4 year span twice. So I knew that once I joined this unit, we would pretty much deploy soon, and we did. We deployed to Okinawa, Japan.
Okay. And this was in late 91?
This is 1992, summer of 1992.
Okay. How long were you in Okinawa?
6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, Okinawa was pretty special because we broke off and we did some training in Korea. We took part in something called Team Spirit, which was, we participated in the last Team Spirit in Korea, and then from there we went to mainland Japan and participated in cold weather training. So it was the first time I've ever skied in my life, and my introduction to skiing was, well, here's a 50-pound pack with all this cold weather gear, and you can imagine how much weight, and here's some skis, and you had your more advanced skiers, and then you had your beginners like myself. And again, it was a very humbling experience. Mm-hmm. You know, I felt like I was crawling, but I wasn't the only one. Yeah. But they teach you, and we cross-trained with Japanese soldiers, which was very special, and same thing in Korea. We got to witness the Rock Marine boot camp, which is they kind of modeled it off of our boot camp. It was very similar. Mm-hmm. It was a very neat experience.
I've heard a lot of good things about the Rock Marines.
Mm-hmm.
They served in Vietnam. They're
very disciplined.
Tremendous, yeah.
Yep.
Tremendous. So then after you were in Okinawa for 6 months, then where did you go?
Well, we came back to Camp Lejeune, participated in all sorts of different types of training. We went off to Bridgeport, California, which is a popular Marine Corps destination. It's a beautiful, beautiful state park, but it's not so beautiful when you have to train in it. I was kind of envious of the people that didn't have to train and were vacationing, but nonetheless, a great experience once again. And when I look back at these experiences, the Marine Corps has this ability where they can push you to the limit of you don't think you could ever possibly achieve some of these physical challenges that they throw at you. Rappelling and climbing rock walls and doing all these crazy things. And you got to remember the air in Bridgeport, California. It was like 9,000 feet above sea level at times. It was very thin, so you have to become acclimated. And again, some of these forced marches up a mountain are just something that I could never do today. But I was able to do it at a very young age, 21, 22 years old. So I look back at these experiences with very, very fond memories. And just bunking with your mates and your fellow Marines. I mean, the relationships that were formed back then is something that I look back with very great fond memories. And I almost wish that we had the technology we have today. I wish I had some of that technology back then so I could stay in touch, because we lost contact with a lot of my friends.
Mm-hmm. So you were after training in California. What did your unit do next?
So I'll fast forward a little bit to you. We went on a Mediterranean cruise, and I know that sounds very elaborate and everything else, but it's really not a cruise. It's so we went on ship, and that was, the summer of 1994. And one of our first destinations was Paris, France, and then from there we went to England. From England we went to Africa, and we were told that things were heating up in Somalia, and we weren't told very much. When I look back at what was filtered down to the troops, it wasn't very much. But nonetheless, it's something you have to understand. People have to understand is that we are readied, and we are accepting of that challenge. We wanted to go, whatever was taking place at the time. It's not something that we had any hesitancy whatsoever. Mm-hmm. If there was a threat, we wanted to respond to that threat, and we wanted to do our job as Marines. So we found out that believe that there were 16 hostages that were in harm's way. Not 16 hostages, 16 civilians that were in harm's way in Mogadishu, Somalia. And they were in a storage facility. And our mission was to, and this is part of a big mission, it was a very small part of this mission, to go in there at nighttime and retrieve these 16 civilians, take them back to the ship, and get them out of harm's way naturally. So I did take part in this. It was called a NEA, which is a non-combatant evacuation mission. And at the time, we were trained on these little rubber raider boats, and we went on to land. We did our thing, set up a perimeter, again, not knowing what is actually taking place. And we were told, okay, break down the perimeter. We got back on these little rubber raider boats and went back to the USS Austin, which was the ship that I was served on.
A Navy ship or a Marine Corps ship?
Navy. It's a LPD-4, landing platform deck, 4th generation. And I believe that got decommissioned a couple of years later. And again, we didn't have the technology that we have today, so we didn't really know where these civilians ended up, and the only thing we knew that it was mission accomplished and good job, you know. And from there, though, we stayed offshore Somalia for about 30 days.
Now that's is that the East Indian Ocean? Or
I believe so. Yes, Indian Ocean. Yes.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And all I remember is the extreme heat. And prior to going there, we trained in Kenya, which was a very unique opportunity. And I love to tell the story of our captain took us on a patrol mission one day, and I guess he had his compass and he had his map, and it took us through a swamp, a waist-high swamp in the jungles of Kenya, Africa. And all I'm thinking to myself is at any time, I don't know what's in the swamp, you know, could take any one of us down. I didn't want a snake wrapping around my ankle and taking us down, but and in the distance, I mean, we saw hippopotamus. I mean, and it was the only time that we were able to carry live rounds. You know, a couple of us were authorized to carry live rounds. So that was an experience you can never get out of a book. And I value those experiences very, very much. Meeting the nationals there, and it's so unique to get that perspective, and then to come home and to think about how lucky we are, what we have here, as compared to some of these other countries.
When you did that to Kenya, or even in Somalia, was that a company that you were part of that participated, or was it a larger force? Or was it less than a company size?
Again, I think it was a larger, but the information that we were told, I kind of wish I knew back then what the full extent of it was, and I don't really know. I just know that our company took part of this, but I do believe it was a bigger operation.
And by this time you were still a PFC, or had you advanced?
No, I was a Lance Corporal.
Lance.
Sometime during that 6-month cruise, I did get promoted to the rank of Corporal. I had an opportunity to go up in front of a meritorious promotion board, and it's funny, I prepared myself about as best as I thought I could, and we had these industrial dry cleaning irons and that were available to us. So I was pressing my uniform, and in doing so, I left it on a couple seconds longer than I should have, and my buttons had burned through my camouflage uniform. So if there's one thing that Marines can pick out from a meritorious board, it was attention to detail, and I got you would call it, I guess, dinged or whatever, for having a button coming through. And that's what I was told after that. That's how come I didn't receive the promotion. However, the promotion came a couple of months later anyway, so all is well.
It's all part of the
traditions
of the Corps. Yeah.
Right.
How many Marines are on the LPD-4?
It was our battalion, so I would say, let's say close to 500 Marines.
Okay. Anything else that occurred in Somalia other than the heat and hanging off the coast for a month or so after the fact?
The bugs, possibly. No, really, it was just a matter of preparation, and we would receive intelligence, and we'd have briefings, and we would have workups, but it was a lot of hurry up and wait, to be honest with you.
After that, what did you do?
So after that, I came back to North Carolina, and I had satisfied what the Marine Corps calls 2 pumps. So it's 2 overseas deployments within 3 years. So I went and saw what they call it's essentially a recruiter, a career planner, they call him. And I saw the career planner, and I said, listen, I'd like to, although I loved the infantry and it's what I wanted to do, before I get out of the Marine Corps, I want to see another side of the Marine Corps. And he says, well, what are you? And I said, well, I'm a machine gunner. And they said, okay, we could put you as part of a support group. So I went to the 2nd FSSG, and I became a machine gun instructor for non-infantry. So the Camp Lejeune had this little school, and it was a little infantry school, and I think every Marine would tell you that the essence of a Marine is a rifleman. First and foremost, whatever you may be in the Marine Corps, you are a basic rifleman. So you may be in the motor pool, you may be a cook, you may be admin, but you will receive training in the infantry. So they would go to this little school, Battle Skills Training School it was called. And I had a lot of fun passing on my knowledge as a machine gunner to non-infantry. And it gave me an opportunity. It really opened up my lens to another side of the Marine Corps. So in other words, I got to work with female Marines. That never happened before. So that experience I valued, and I felt that I saw it, being a member of the infantry is very insular, but that's what you feel that the Marine Corps is. It's not until you step outside and you see, wow, there's so many other opportunities here. There's such a broader picture than what you think it is at the time. Mm-hmm. So I valued that.
Once a Marine, always a Marine? Would you like to talk about that?
That's what they say. There isn't a day goes by. There isn't a day that goes by. There isn't a month that goes by where I don't. I just look back and I reflect with such positivity. And a lot of people come up to me and they say, my son or my uncle or my brother or whomever are thinking about joining the Marine Corps. What do you think? I never dissuade anybody from looking into it. It's not for everybody, but for me, it was the perfect choice.
Your advice to family members who ask about having one of their children or a relative go into the Marine Corps, and the fact that you would recommend them?
Sure. Quite often people come up to me and they say, Sean, what do you think? So-and-so is contemplating joining the Marine Corps or enlisting. And my advice to them is, talk to a recruiter, and it's a great opportunity. It's not for everybody, but it's certainly worth the exploration, and they're looking for a few good men always. So I highly recommend any branch of the service, but naturally I'm a little biased towards the Marine Corps. Yeah. I mean, it did everything I expected it to do for me and more. Everything I've read about the Marine Corps, instilling that pride and preparing you for life, it did for me. And it's not to say, I can only speak from my experiences. It led me to my career. From a very young age, I knew that I wanted to become a police officer. And I first set my goals to be a state trooper because I liked the uniform, I liked the presence, and I had more of a militaristic feel to it. But as I mentioned earlier, my father was a municipal police officer. So I started to get the hometown feel, and I thought that took priority over highway police officer and stuff like that. So I just knew that with the Marine Corps background that I felt that I could achieve anything. And I really, when I left the Marine Corps, there was kind of no stopping me. I was going to achieve every goal that I wanted to achieve, and that's what it did for me.
There's a tremendous maturation process that you get between 18 and 22, depending on what you do.
It's unbelievable. I mean, there's a saying that it makes you transforms you from a boy to a man, and it really does that. Within the 3-month period of boot camp, it does that. But
and when would they call you a Marine?
So in boot camp, you were always labeled a recruit, if not a nasty recruit, or there's all sorts of different labels to the recruit. But you were a recruit, and a recruit was the bottom of the food chain. They would never refer to you as a Marine. So my experience was, I think it was the day before graduation, and we were marching back. So one day we were marching back from the chow hall back to the barracks, and I guess we were doing a very good job of marching, and my senior drill instructor said, "You look good, my little Marines." And I think we all got goosebumps because it was the first time unofficially we were called Marine. And then naturally on graduation day, you were called Marine. And
Sean, I'm sure you have some interesting stories to tell about boot camp. Would you like to share any of those with us, about the experiences?
There's a plethora of stories about boot camp. Some of the most memorable ones are the games that they play. And you can't understand at the time why you're playing these games, but like somebody said earlier, it all ties into a story, and every game has a purpose. And one of the things they used to make us do is we'd have evening chow, and we'd all have a hearty meal, and we'd be marching back to the barracks. And the drill instructor would say to us, "You're marching nasty, and when you get back to the barracks, we're going to pay for this." So the way of paying for it was to do PT. So we did PT after a hearty meal, and then they would say, "All right, get your canteens out," and we would drink water until the first recruit threw up, and then, as you can imagine, it was a domino effect. So they had 30 recruits throwing up, and in order to prove you had drank your canteen, you had to hold it above your head. So, and then we just have to go back to the bathroom and refill it and get online, and the games were endless. We used to have sand pits outside the barracks, and they would say, okay, exit the barracks and go in these sand pits, and we're going to do leg lifts and push-ups, and then we'd have something called a sandstorm. And we'd have to throw sand up in the air as we did our calisthenics. So you can imagine the games at the time. I look back now and I laugh. We had they had an exercise called scuzz brush the bulkhead, which sounds ridiculous, and it was ridiculous. You had a little scuzz brush, and you got on your knees, and you went to the bulkheads, and you cleaned the bulkheads, and you came back, and it was this crouching move that, exhausted you. So the games were endless. Everything they did was a countdown. So in other words, when you got there and they said, okay, you could make a head call, which is you can use the bathroom. Well, that wasn't even relaxing. So in other words, you went into the bathroom and you had about 10 seconds in order to do your business, and if you couldn't do it within that time frame, you were back online with a full bladder, and you just had to deal with it. And everything was a request permission, and there was never an I. It was this recruit. If you referred to yourself as I, you would get corrected, and it was never a you. You would refer to you as a sheep. So you were just you were a recruit, and it's this recruit request permission to use to make a head call, and you would get denied a good part of the time. There were instances where we'd go to the chow hall and we would be starving. I mean, you dreamt about food. I dreamt about food for 3 months. I couldn't wait to get home to my grandmother, to a home-cooked meal, and that was what I really yearned to do when I went home on leave. So we'd go to the chow hall one particular evening, and you would get your meal, and it would be put in front of you, and they say, 1, 2, 3, attack, which is mean you could start your meal. And as we were attacking and eating the meal, they said that we were acting all uncivilized and nasty, and we just have to get up from our meal and go back to the barracks. And you didn't eat again until the very next morning. So you were hungry. There was no snack time. Every recruit, and I think every veteran can tell you that mail call was especially a very special time during the day. So our senior drill instructor would take us in a corner, and we would do a little school circle, and he would hand out our mail. And this is a funny story. We used to have a board in our barracks. It was called Hog of the Week. So if your girlfriend or whomever sent you a picture, and it was a particular, a girl that you had, girlfriend that you had back home, and you felt inclined to put it on the Hog of the Week board, that can earn you a potential phone call home. So every week the drill instructor would come out and say, all right, who's the Hog of the Week? And he would pick out this girl, and he'd say, okay, Smith, you earned yourself a phone call. And I didn't earn myself a phone call for Hog of the Week. I did earn myself a phone call for shooting well in the rifle range. And I was able to make a collect call home. But, you took your chances. You had just a couple minutes, and if nobody was home, nobody was home. So there was no connection back home. You couldn't make phone calls. You couldn't send emails. None of this stuff existed. So good old-fashioned snail mail was all you had. And I enjoyed writing letters just as much as I enjoyed receiving letters, because that was your only kind of contact to civilization.
I wonder, from what I've read, whether boot camp for the Marine Corps is the same today as it was then, because of the whole culture of harassment and the like. Do you have any feedback on that?
From what I understand today, and I don't know if this stands true, the recruits have something called a stress card. So if they feel overly stressed, they can take out this card, and I think the drill instructor will back off. I don't know if that's true. I would like to think that the traditions remain the same, but I do know I've seen the drill instructor manual, which is about that thick, and in that drill instructor manual is all sorts of things that they have to come to compliance with. And like you mentioned before, if somebody feels that they're being harassed or picked on, that could be potentially a career-ending move for that particular drill instructor. So I'm sure they walk a finer line today as they did, while the recruits were getting ready to deploy to Vietnam or some other conflict.
I just feel sorry for anybody who doesn't get to experience the things that they used to do in boot camp and the things you had to tolerate, because those are the stories that get told in the American Legion huts and the VFW huts.
That's right.
the tough experiences, but that's just the way things are moving.
Exactly. There was a famous story, Paris Island story, I don't know if this is true again, that the recruits were woken up in the middle of the night, and they took a forced march, and they marched into some swamp, and then one of the recruits died as a result, and that was the end of that. Now, I can't tell you that we were woken up in the middle of the night, but there was a lot of harassment. Let's call it harassment, a lot. But that's what that's what you signed up to do. As far as, so this is another funny story. I had to wear glasses. I've had the LASIK surgery, so I no longer have to wear glasses. But at the time, they issue you military government glasses, which we used to refer to as birth control glasses. And so you were labeled, any recruit that wore glasses, you were called eyeballs and all sorts of funny stories, all sorts of funny words. So one particular time, a drill instructor came up to me, and he says, what are you looking at, Smith? And I said, nothing, sir. Oh, nothing. You saying I'm nothing? Oh, that's not what I said, sir. And he took his finger and he went like that to me, and with my basically shoved my eyeglasses back at me, and I fell into my rack. And that's just what you did. You got back online. It's you couldn't take anything personal because everybody got equal treatment. But you also, in the same respect, you couldn't slack because the slackers were identified very quickly. You had to keep up with the herd.
That's good stuff. One of the things that I think most young men at that time and even before got out of their military experiences, they got to travel and to see different parts of the world and different cultures. And you were both in the Pacific as well as in Africa and in the Med.
Practically sailed the 7 seas.
Yeah, you've had a tremendous exposure to other cultures and all. Have any stories or anything you'd like to share as to places you visited and things that you saw?
Sure. So one of the most interesting countries that we visited was a country called Bulgaria, and this was back in 1994, I believe, and just a few years prior to, Bulgaria was a communist country. So just the preparation we received before receiving liberty. Again, liberty is something that's a privilege. It's not a right, and if you have somehow broke any sort of rule or regulation, you were not receiving liberty. So we recognize this, and there's nothing more forward we look to than to get off that ship and to experience some culture and to experience a meal or a drink or whatever it may be. You got to remember, a berthing area is equivalent of maybe just a couple bedrooms, and there must have been 25, maybe 30 recruits, and the sleeping conditions weren't the best. I don't know how we endured it, but we did. We used to call them, they were coffin racks. I'm not sure what they have today, but they're very small little racks, and I can honestly say that I slept very good for those 6 months, even though you're swaying back and forth. However, when you received liberty, you were briefed, and either they'd have a couple nationals come on board, or one of the officers would say, this is the country that we're entering, there's certain customs and traditions that you have to follow, and if you step outside of that, there's potential of you possibly getting arrested. And remember that you have to get back to the ship at a certain time. It's like Cinderella. You have to be back by, let's say, midnight. And if you weren't back at a particular time, say midnight, that would mean that your liberty got canceled for the next destination or the following night, wherever you were at port. So you were also assigned a liberty buddy, and what that meant was that you left the ship with your buddy, and you also have to return with your buddy. So you can imagine we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have email, we didn't have text messaging, and with what we were up to at the time, we got broken up a lot of the time, and we had to come up with a plan, and the plan was to meet at a particular location, therefore we can get back onto the ship at this time so our liberty didn't get canceled and we didn't get into trouble. So you can imagine it took some doing to get back to the ship on time. And I also found it funny, like we did a currency exchange, and every different country we pulled into port, we would have a paycheck or two maybe saved up that we didn't spend at the ship's door. So we had some money available to us, and we do a currency exchange. We had no idea what we got in return for our US dollar at the time, or how far that would take us out wherever we were. But I could tell you this, we always ate well. We experienced the culture. We did a lot of fun things and a lot of fond memories. And I always tell people that you can't get that out of a textbook. And there were probably a few times where I should have gotten into trouble, but didn't get into trouble. But those I can't reveal here.
Well, in your time in the Marine Corps, you were in Okinawa, Japan, Korea, Kenya, Somalia, and other Bulgaria and other parts of the Med cruise.
A couple different locations in Spain. I went to Crete, Greece, which was wonderful. I always tell people that the water in Greece is something else. To test the, I remember taking a nickel and throwing it off board, and you could just see the nickel trickle down in that water forever. It was something very, very beautiful. I think that about sums it up. There were maybe a couple other countries sprinkled in there, but all around great experiences. Certainly don't have any regrets. And again, it's something I would recommend to somebody contemplating it.
When you came back to North Carolina, back out of the Med cruise, was that your final duty station?
I had one more year left, and I think I mentioned previously, I got assigned to a support group where I took my knowledge of being a machine gunner and transferred that knowledge to non-infantrymen. And I got to see a whole other side of the Marine Corps that I didn't even know existed. So it was funny because it's not easy to do as a 21-year-old or 22-year-old young man to go in front of your commanding officer and say, "Sir, I would like a transfer station," because naturally he looked at me and he says, "Well, why do you want this? We value you here. We want you to stay with our unit." So he almost felt a little betrayal. And but then again, you talk to other people in the Marine Corps and they said, "Do it. You did your obligation of 2 pumps and overseas, and it's about time you break away and let a new guy do what you did." So that was my mindset. 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marine Division later went to Cuba. So that would have been probably my last destination before I got discharged. But again, no regrets.
Were you a sergeant by the time you were discharged?
No, so I just remained corporal, which was an E4. Yeah. At the time, and I'm sure it still is right now, it was very, very hard to obtain rank in the Marine Corps, especially in the infantry. So I was proud of my rank as a corporal, and you know, I got my stripes later on in my career as a police officer.
Peacetime is also slow for advancement as well. Yeah.
Correct, and I got to mention that too. I was extremely, extremely lucky from late 1991 to 1995 when I got out that we were generally, it was peacetime, and I got to serve during peacetime. And you know, I tell everybody, going into the Marine Corps, going into any branch of service nowadays, is certainly a lot riskier than it was when I had it, and I thank God that I did not have to do anything above and beyond.
So you get out in 95.
Right.
And what did you do?
So I got out in 1995, and I can tell you this about the Marine Corps. They prep you for getting out, and I can't stress it enough. I came out with, I went to a resume writing class, and they prepped me for job interviews, and I think they really, as part of the separation process from the service, I came out motivated, I came out with a good resume, and I wanted to be a police officer. That was my dream, to follow my father's footsteps. And my brother was a police officer. Matter of fact, I have 2 brothers who were police officers. So I just feel it's in my DNA. I feel this is my calling. And it didn't take me very long. I went back to my hometown of Tenafly, and I saw the chief of police at the time, and I said, I'm back in town. I'm separated from the service. I'm looking for a job. Obviously, you might not have a police officer position open, but is it possible you have a dispatcher position open? And that's where I started. He gave me a full-time job as a civilian dispatcher. And 11 months later, I was putting my resume out there to surrounding towns. And my brother's chief at the time had told me that Hillsdale, unfortunately, they had an officer pass away, another couple officers retired, so there's a few positions that opened up. So he said, get up to Hillsdale and drop your resume off and meet Chief Mikulski. He's a really nice guy. Tell him who you are. And that's precisely what I did. I put a blazer jacket on, and I dressed up the best I could. I went in there with my resume, and I was greeted by Patrolman Mazzio behind the desk. And he says, who are you? I said, I'm Sean Smith. He goes, what would you like? I said, I'd like to speak to the chief. So he says, hold on a minute. And here I am thinking, I've done this before, and the chief's going to say he's on lunch or come back later or give me a resume. Chief Mikulski brought me into his office, and I caught him at an opportune time, because at the time his Lieutenant Stalter was in the office as well. So I happened to have the chief and his executive officer in the office. So I was kind of put on the spot, and he looked over my resume, and we chatted a little bit. And he was very honest with me. He said, we're looking for a couple officers that are going to come on board as transfers, and then we're also looking for an officer to send to the police academy. So I might not have a position for you now, but it's not to say one will come available to you very soon. So I left there with a very positive feeling. I shook his hand, and to my surprise, I got a phone call several months later saying, Sean, we'd like to interview you. And 2 interviews later, I was offered a position of patrolman. And here I am years later as the captain, which I'm just so pleased that I've rose to that level. My father was a captain, as I said before. To this day, I call him Cap. So now he calls me Cap. So that's a special thing.
That is great.
And, I just found out my nephew, 3rd generation, was hired in Olympia, Washington. So I am very excited to hear that news. So we have 3 generations of police officers in my family now.
That's super.
Yeah.
And you credit the Marine Corps to helping you in your career.
I credit the Marine Corps for everything. I think it's the foundation of who I am. As a matter of fact, some people say, Sean, sometimes you're too militaristic, and I can't shake it. It's, to me, it was everything and then some. And I think it is a special branch of service. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Just a funny story. I was a member of the Marine Corps League, and I had Marine Corps license plates. I don't have them anymore, but I would be, this is on a routine level, I would be at a traffic light and somebody would be beeping the horn. What's this guy doing here? What's he beeping the horn? And I look over and he goes, Semper Fi, Semper Fi. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, he must see my license plates. And I give him the Semper Fi back. So that's the esprit de corps, the brotherhood, and I don't think that exists in other branches of service. Not to put the other branches of service down at all, but I believe that esprit de corps exists only with Marines. It's a special bond.
I think you're right, yeah. Anything further you'd like to add to the Sean Smith story of your military career and what it's left you with?
It's just left me with an appreciation and I think a real humbleness that I respect and cherish where we live. I think Hillsdale, New Jersey is probably one of the best places in the world to live in and to raise children in, to send children to school. Bergen County is beautiful. But I love the fact that I got to step outside of that and see other parts of the world, and not everybody gets to see that. And I've seen some really, really bad parts of the world. I've seen some really beautiful parts of the world. But the expression of kissing the ground, when I got off that med cruise, after 6 months of being at sea and experiencing all these different countries, I wanted to kiss the ground. I didn't physically kiss the ground, but I wanted to, and I was so pleased to be home. So I think we have the best country and certainly the best county and the best town right here. And I'm just, honored to serve and be here.
Sean, thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service to the country, and thank you for your service to Hillsdale. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you as well. Semper Fi.